Hello, families. Welcome to the Oikos Family Podcast, Episode 8. My name is Sonja Wood. Today I want to talk to you about a topic which covers areas of concern that parents are having with their children in certain areas. And it's fairly broad. It's called the pathway. And the reason why it's called the pathway is there's a little story about that which I'm going to tell you. And I hope this little story is going to help you in all the various different kinds of areas that you might be having a struggle with. So I'm hoping you'll be able to apply this pathway story to your specific situation. So let me tell you the story. In fact, before I jump in there, let me just say that this story that I'm going to share with you, I've shared with quite a number of people, and they have told me how it's really, really been helpful to them. And also we've written it about the story in a few of the different books that we've written. When I say we, I'm referring to myself and our daughter, Missy. And this story is actually a story that I told her, our daughter, and it was very helpful to her at the time. And as I say, it seems to have been helpful to others. So you may or may not know this story, but let me tell it to you. One day we decided that it's time to put down the book that we were trying to do a lesson out of, because there was a lot of struggling with this particular lesson. So I said to the children, okay, let's put the books away. We're going for a walk. And what happened on this walk was quite amazing, in that we left for the walk, and fortunately for us, we live in a nature reserve, so it's not difficult to find places to go for walks. But if you are living in a town or a suburb or whatever, you can just take a walk in your garden and tell your children this story, maybe. Or maybe you can get your children to listen to this story. That would also be nice. So we went for our walk. And the purpose for going for the walk was there had been a struggle happening in the morning with the lessons. And so while we were going for the walk, I didn't have anything in mind about, how to deal with the difficulties that we were having. I just knew that we needed to take a break and separate ourselves and get a bit of distance from the difficulty. So here we are going for this walk in nature. And I then begin to call on the Lord, which has become my habit. So I'm going to encourage it to be your habit too. And that is call on him. Just call on him. When you are having a difficulty, please call on him. Don't just try and struggle on in your own thoughts and your own planning on how you're going to resolve something and struggle. I'm suggesting that you just call on him at that time when you start heading into the struggle. Just say, Lord, please help me. I need some of your divine inspiration right now. So I was busy calling on him while we were taking this walk in nature. And there before us, right across the path, was a fallen over tree. And it was rather a large tree that had fallen across the path. So we stood contemplating, looking at this tree, thinking, so now what do we do? Do we try and climb over it, which seemed impossible because there was just lots of huge branches and a lot of foliage, and it seemed that would be quite a struggle to climb over it. It wasn't just a log. And then we saw that we could perhaps crawl underneath it, might be easier than trying to climb over it. But that also looked like there would be quite a lot of difficulties and obstacles to get through climbing underneath. So then we decided, let's see if we can walk around it, which is what we started to do. So we went off the path and we were sort of walking along next to the tree, so that we could go around to the top of where the tree had landed on the path. Not on the path anymore. And then all the way around it and then back join onto the path again. We decided that might actually be the best option here. So we did this. We started walking along next to the tree that was lying on the ground. And we hadn't gone far when we heard little squeaky sounds, like really faint little squeaky sounds. So we stopped and we listened very, very carefully. And the squeak, we followed the sound of the squeak and got nearer and nearer to it. And then we saw a few tiny little rodent. They looked like rodents, but they were tiny little pink creatures. We couldn't quite identify what they were, but we observed these little creatures and we noticed that there wasn't a mother with them. So we started to wonder if the mother's gone off hunting and she's going to come back. And we didn't want to remove these little creatures from their spot, because what if the mother was coming back? So we decided to press on with our walk after spending quite a bit of time down on our knees looking at these cute little pink creatures. As I say, I think at that point we had identified them as probably some kind of rodent. So anyway, we found our way around to the top of the tree and back down the other side and onto the path, and we continued with our walk. And then we discovered another fallen tree. So clearly there had been quite a severe wind or a storm through this particular part of the trail. And so now we have decided, you know what, this one doesn't look like it's possible at all. Let's turn around and head back home the way we came. Because we knew this particular nature trail quite well, that it went around the edge of the lake and came out the other side. But this time it looked to us like we're not going to get around the other side, to come out the other end of this particular pathway. So we turned around and we started heading back again. And we did the same thing to get past the first fallen tree we had found, and we went around it. And on our way back down the other side, obviously, we heard the little squeaks again, which were now somewhat louder. And then we decided we would wait there and wait and see if the mother was going to return, because in this time that we'd been gone, it seemed like she hadn't returned. And we waited and we waited. And while we were waiting, we were sitting there next to the fallen tree. And remember now, I'd said that I had called on God. Now, I'd called on God to help me with the struggles we had had in the morning time when we were doing our lessons. But now there was this big distraction with the fallen tree and how to get over or under or go around. And then there were the little, what we think were mice. And then there was the next fallen tree. So all this time, as you can imagine, I'm not really listening out and hearing from God any inspiration he might be giving me, because I'm busy with the children and talking about these little creatures and finding our way on the path. And so I'm not being silent and I'm not being attentive to any inspiration that God might be giving me. And that is just another point I want to make, because he says specifically, be still and know me. So I hadn't been very still in this time from when I'd called out to him until this moment now, when we're going to sit and wait and see if the mother returns. We realized as well that if we sit too close to these little babies, the mother might be nervous to return. So we decided to wait a little bit of a distance away from this little nest of tiny little pink creatures. And we sat quietly, and we knew that we must be very, very quiet, because the mother might return and we don't want to alarm her. And so we were sitting there very, very quietly. And now in this instance, now we're all quiet, we're just sitting quietly, which is now a very good exercise to teach the children to be still in nature, because now we're trying to think of a way to help these little creatures. And the way to do that is just to sit very still and very quiet and hope that the mother returns. So now in this stillness and quietness, I get this inspiration from the Lord. And that this whole illustration of this tree falling on our path is something that I can talk to our daughter about with the struggle she was having with that lesson. In that there was like a block, something had fallen over in her way, and she just couldn't understand, and she couldn't find the way through to understanding. And so maybe it meant that we needed to take an alternate route. Maybe we needed to not try and break through the blockage that we were having on the pathway. Maybe we needed to travel a different road. Maybe we needed to go on a completely different route to the one that we were trying to plow through on. And maybe even if we went on that different route, we would discover things that we definitely wouldn't have discovered had we just overcome this blockage in front of us, as in chop the tree up and try and get through, or climb over it, or climb under it. Any one of those ways was going to be quite difficult. We were going to end up probably injured if we tried to go over or under the tree. But instead we just walked around it and we discovered these little mice. So this whole inspiration came to me that I could actually explain to our daughter that maybe we need to consider her struggle as not something as a blockage, but maybe we can think about it as a journey, as an alternate journey, and maybe we're going to discover some things by taking a different route. So all of this wonderful inspiration comes to me while we're waiting for the mother hopefully to return, which never happened. And so then we had to discuss whether we leave these little creatures there. Would they survive the night? Should we come back and check tomorrow? Or should we take them with us? What should we do? And it was decided that we would take them with us. We'd take them home. And so now we took them home, and now we suddenly had to figure out, what do we do? How do we feed them? What is the best thing to feed them with? How do we help them to survive? Because it appears that their mother should have come back in some of the time that we had waited, and that when we had left them and returned, one would have thought that even if the mother had been out to get food, she'd be back because she would come back to feed her little baby. So we started thinking maybe the mother had been injured herself or even killed with the accident of this tree having fallen over. And so now we're having to research and think about, now if the mother was feeding them, what is the milk of the mother, and how do we replicate that and get as close to that as we possibly can? And so we there began all the study and research to try and find out how to take care of these little, very, very cute, squeaky little creatures. If any children are listening now, I'm sure they would also identify with how exciting and how much fun it is when one has to care for such tiny little, delicate little creatures. So by this stage, we had identified that they were some kind of little mouse, or mice, should I say, because there were more than one. And I'm not going to tell you how many because I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 or 4. It wasn't a lot. It wasn't like a handful, 6 or more. It was less than 5, let's say. And we had now discovered what we should be feeding them. And so the care of these little mice began. And now if you can just think about this for a minute, that do you think we were worrying about the struggles we were having with the lessons? Do you think that that was the focus by this point? Well, it certainly wasn't, and I'm sure you would have agreed that with me at this point, going, no, that wasn't the focus anymore. So if you were thinking, no, that wasn't the focus, then you're right, because we had forgotten about the difficulties and the lesson that we had had such a block on, and we're getting into a state of quite a lot of difficulty and struggle and suffering even. So this little nature walk had really changed the day for us. But the next day, perhaps we were going to open that book and perhaps we were going to face the struggle again. But it so turned out that it didn't happen the next day, because the next day we were still absorbed with caring for these little creatures, because what happened is one had died. And so now we were really concerned why that one died. It was the smallest one, and when we got it home, it was quite cold. So then we started looking into how to keep them warm and put them in a box with a light bulb in it. So now we're doing all this science to figure out how close the light bulb should be to keep the little mouse warm, and so on and so forth. So there wasn't a consideration to the lesson, because the consideration was about the life of these little creatures, and we were learning more again about that. But the day did come, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how many days later, but the day arrived when we had to face the book again, as in continue with the lessons, continue where we left off, and very quickly here was the struggle before us. But as I mentioned to you, that I got this inspiration about the fallen tree and about the blockage and the pathway, and we needed to find an alternate route. I hadn't shared that with the children at the time because, as you've heard, the focus was the mouse. So the time came days later when the struggle was before us again, and I instantly recalled what the Lord had shown me, how he had given me some inspiration about that and some guidance and some wisdom. It comes from him. And so what I did is, as soon as I saw the struggle was being faced again, we closed the book and I said, I've got a story to tell you. Now, remember a few days ago when we went for that walk and we found the little mice. By now, of course, all the mice had been named and they were thriving and they'd started getting little fur on their bodies. And we were just seeing the results of the care of these little creatures. And so I used this example to share that when we face a struggle in our life, when we feel like there's a blockage and the tree has fallen down before us, it's almost as though if you imagine a pathway in the brain and we're trying to get some lesson, some understanding through on a particular pathway, and all of a sudden there's just this tremendous blockage, like a tree fell down and fell over right there on the pathway in our brain. And now, as I shared earlier, you can actually spend time trying to clear that path, or you can find an alternate route. So I said to Missy at this stage, I said, why don't we find an alternate route? Let's not try and go this way that we've been going with this lesson. Let's see if there's a different way that we can get to understanding on this particular problem and this particular struggle. And so she was in agreement with that, because we found the little mouse and we actually found life, and we actually learned so much more than had we just stayed there that day and got to a point of tremendous difficulty, frustration, maybe even tears, maybe even anger, we would have instead had a result of that would have been a lot of negative emotion. If we had tried to resolve this blockage that we had there and then without actually stopping, taking time away from it, calling on God, getting some help, and in this whole example, we could not but see the fact that we had learned so much more and it was of such greater value than had we just tried to push through this broken, fallen over tree and this broken path that was blocking our way. So we have used this, we call it the pathway, and we have used this fallen over tree pathway story so many times in our own personal lives. So the moment we feel overcome with something blocking our way, we remember the story and we recall how much we learned by taking an alternate route. And it actually brought life and joy and even sorrow sometimes, because there was sorrow when that one little mouse didn't make it and we had to lose the one little mouse. But the amount of joy and the amount of learning and the opportunities that came from that alternate route has been something that has always stayed with us for the future now. And as I'm sharing it, I'm just thinking now in our adult lives and now that our children are adults, they can apply the same story, the same example, this divine inspiration that God gave us on so many levels in so many different ways. And so on our next podcast, I'd like to talk more about that specifically. But today's podcast was about the pathway. And I just hope that it has been supportive to you. As I said at the beginning, I have been hearing of people having struggles with their children in various ways. And I just thought this little story of the pathway might help you in your particular circumstances. I really, really hope it does, because that is the point and purpose of these podcasts. I just feel so, so privileged to be able to be with you and talk to you and share with you some of the things that have helped us along the way on this journey of our learning lifestyle. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you will be able to listen to the next podcast where I hope to take this topic a little further. Until the next podcast then, thank you for joining me. Bye for now.